They moved into the house on a warm spring morning, their car loaded to the roof with boxes, plants, and all the hopefulness of a couple starting fresh. Daniel and Sarah Wilkerson had been searching for months. They were tired of noisy apartments, thin walls, traffic sounds, and city life that never stopped humming. When they found the big, two-story house on the edge of a sleepy little town, it felt like fate. The price was suspiciously low. The real estate agent had mumbled something about cosmetic issues and motivated sellers. But the house itself was charming. Creaky wood floors, tall windows, a wide porch swing that swayed faintly in the spring breeze. "This is it," Sarah whispered as they stepped through the front door the first time, dust motes swirling in the sunlight like tiny golden ghosts. Daniel smiled. "Our forever home." They spent days cleaning, unpacking, learning the quirks of the place. The old plumbing groaned when the shower ran. The floorboards creaked like they were gossiping. Sarah laughed about it all, but she noticed things Daniel didn't, like how the hallway upstairs seemed longer than she remembered, or how the closet in the guest room looked slightly bigger each time she opened it. She told herself it was moving stress, nothing more. On the 7th day, Daniel came downstairs frowning. "Did you move the pantry door?" he asked. Sarah blinked. "What?" He pointed. The pantry door had always been on the left side of the kitchen wall. Now it was on the right. Sarah laughed uneasily. "We must be remembering it wrong." But the next morning, the bathroom door opened the opposite direction. And 2 days later, the hallway closet had vanished entirely. One night, Sarah got up for water. The hallway from their bedroom to the stairs had always been about 10 steps long. But that night, it stretched. Longer. Far longer. She couldn't even see the stairwell light at the end. The shadows seemed thicker, like they clung to the walls. She froze, then backed into the bedroom, heart hammering. When Daniel checked minutes later, the hallway was back to normal. Soon, entire rooms were swapping places overnight. The guest bedroom traded spots with the study. The upstairs bathroom appeared at the end of the hall one morning instead of near the master bedroom. Windows shifted to different walls. Some hallways ended in blank walls that hadn't been there the day before. Daniel began marking door frames with chalk before bed. He woke to find the marks on different walls, or sometimes stretched into strange shapes, like something inside the wood had smeared them with long fingers. They called a contractor, hoping for an explanation. The man walked the house floor to attic, shaking his head. "Old places settle," he said finally, "but walls don't move." He left looking pale, refusing to take payment. The changes grew bolder. Some nights the hallways doubled in length. Other nights rooms disappeared entirely, replaced by narrow corridors that twisted the wrong way before ending in locked doors. Daniel opened one of those doors once, just blackness inside. A smell like wet earth drifted out before he shut it again. On the 3rd week, Sarah woke to whispers behind the walls, soft voices, indistinct. But she swore they were saying her name. The next night, Daniel heard footsteps upstairs, slow, heavy. He chased them with a flashlight, but the upstairs layout had changed again. Every hallway turned the wrong way. Every door led somewhere unfamiliar. By the final night, the house had gone completely wrong. They tried to leave, but the front door wasn't where it should be. The kitchen led to the upstairs hallway. The basement stairs ended in the master bedroom. The house folded in on itself, corridors twisting like intestines. They ran through hallways that stretched longer with each step. Doors slammed behind them on their own. The whispers grew louder, a chorus rising through the walls. At some point, Sarah looked back and swore the stairs themselves were moving, crawling slowly along the wall like insects. When neighbors came days later, the house was empty. But the floor plan had changed completely again. The upstairs was nothing but a single winding hallway lined with dozens of doors, all leading nowhere. When Peter and Emily Thompson bought the old farmhouse, they thought they'd found their dream home. It sat at the edge of a quiet rural road, surrounded by weathered fences, rolling fields, and a line of dark woods along the horizon. The house itself had been empty for nearly a decade, but its bones were solid. Big kitchen, wide porch, even a creaky old barn for storage. The price was suspiciously low, but the realtor insisted everything was in order. The last owner passed, she explained vaguely, shuffling paperwork. Family inherited the place but didn't want it. Peter and Emily didn't ask too many questions. They had 2 kids, a lifetime of city noise behind them, and dreams of starry nights and peace and quiet ahead. So on a gray Saturday in early spring, they moved in. The first 2 weeks were uneventful. There was the usual chaos of unpacking boxes, setting up bedrooms, fixing small problems. A leaky faucet here, a loose door hinge there. Emily loved the kitchen window overlooking the fields. Peter liked the old wood-burning stove. But sometimes when she walked the upstairs hallway, Emily felt unsettled. She couldn't explain why. Something about the far end near the attic door made her walk faster, like she didn't want to linger there too long. It was on the 12th day that Emily noticed the outline. She was vacuuming upstairs when sunlight caught the wallpaper near the attic stairs at just the right angle, revealing the faint rectangular impression of a door long since covered over. She tapped the wall. Hollow. There was space back there. A hidden room, maybe? When Peter came home from work, she showed him, excitement tinged with curiosity. They fetched a hammer, peeling back the brittle wallpaper. Beneath it, someone had nailed thin boards over an actual door frame. No handle, just a keyhole stuffed with rust. Probably just storage space, Peter said, prying boards loose. Emily frowned. Then why cover it up? He shrugged. People are weird. It took nearly an hour, but eventually the old door groaned open. A rush of cold air slid out, so cold and stale it smelled metallic, like long-sealed dust and something else. Something sour underneath. Emily coughed. God, it stinks. Peter shined his flashlight inside. The room was small, maybe 10 by 12 feet. No windows. Bare wood floor. And on the walls, handprints. Dozens of them. Small, child-sized, pressed deep into peeling wallpaper, overlapping like frantic signatures. All facing inward, as if they'd been clawing to get out. Emily shuddered. That's unsettling. Peter forced a laugh. Kids probably played in here. Used to be a playroom or something. But the handprints were high up too, near the ceiling. No child could have reached them. That night, Emily dreamed of scratching, a slow, steady sound. Nails dragging across wood. When she woke, the house was silent, but the air felt heavier. The next day, their daughter Lily refused to go upstairs alone. Why not? Emily asked gently. The girl whispered, "The lady in the wall doesn't like us." Emily felt a chill run through her veins. What lady? Lily just shook her head and wouldn't answer. Peter tried to make light of it. He swept the room out, set up a lamp, declared it perfect for storage. But that night the door stood open again when they woke. They'd left it shut. On the third night, Emily walked by and saw words scrawled in the dust on the far wall. She asked Peter if he'd written it. He hadn't. He hammered the door shut the next morning. Not just closed, nailed shut with long iron nails sunk deep into the frame. Out of sight, out of mind, he muttered. That night, at 2:14 a.m., 3 slow knocks came from inside the wall. The next morning, the nails lay scattered on the hallway floor. The door stood wide open. Peter shoved an old wardrobe in front of it. The next day, the wardrobe was moved into the center of the hall. No scratches on the floor. as if it had been carried there carefully. The kids complained of whispers through the vents. Sometimes a woman's voice, sometimes children, crying. On the 8th night, Emily stepped inside the room with a flashlight. The air was ice cold. The lamp Peter set up flickered faintly. And on the floor in the corner, a doll, old, head cracked, dressed stiff with dust. Neither she nor Peter had put it there. That night, the knocking spread. Not just the hidden room. The walls downstairs. The ceiling above their bed. Always 3 knocks. On the 10th night, they heard breathing. Slow, heavy, coming from inside the walls. The final night, Peter set up a camera facing the door. At 2:37 a.m., the footage caught the door opening on its own. Slowly. Something pale moved just inside the frame before the camera went black. When the neighbors checked the house weeks later, they found it empty. But the upstairs door stood open. Handprints covered the walls, fresh and wet, as if pressed there moments before. When James and Melissa Carter bought the old Victorian house on Elmwood Street, they thought they were making the smartest decision of their lives. It was a little rundown, sure, the kind of house with chipping paint, warped floorboards, and ivy climbing up the sides. But it had history, space, and charm. Melissa had fallen in love with the wraparound porch the second she saw it. James loved the idea of owning something with character, and the price, well, the price was so low that it almost felt like stealing. The realtor explained it away quickly. "Property taxes," she said, not quite meeting their eyes. "It's been sitting for a while, that's all." But she didn't explain why the neighbors watched so silently as the Carters signed the papers. The first week was full of hope. Melissa scrubbed the kitchen until the tiles gleamed. James fixed the sagging shutters, cursing cheerfully as the hammer slipped. They bought new curtains, unpacked their wedding china, started making the place feel like home. At night, Melissa fell asleep planning paint colors in her head. But James sometimes lay awake listening to the house groan. Old houses made sounds, he told himself. But sometimes the creaks above their bedroom sounded too steady, too much like footsteps. They first opened the attic on the second weekend. It was James's idea. He wanted to clear it out before winter so they could add insulation. The attic stairs were narrow, steep, tucked behind a door at the end of the upstairs hallway. Melissa followed him, dust rising in thick clouds as they pushed the door open. The single light bulb overhead buzzed to life, barely cutting through the gloom. And there it was. Decades of forgotten belongings stacked high under the sloping roof. A rocking horse with one eye missing. A cracked wardrobe with its door hanging open like a mouth. Boxes of yellowed books. An armchair covered in sheets so dusty it looked like a ghost frozen mid-sit. Melissa wrinkled her nose. "Creepy," she muttered. James grinned, trying to make light of it. "Creepy, but valuable. Half this stuff might be antiques." They spent the whole afternoon hauling everything down. The rocking horse went to the curb. The wardrobe to the garage for firewood. By sunset, the attic was empty for the first time in decades. That night, Melissa dreamed of footsteps. Slow, steady pacing the attic floor. She woke with her heart pounding, the sound fading as though it knew she was listening. The next morning, James went up to check the insulation measurements. The rocking horse was back, right in the center of the attic floor. "Maybe you brought it back inside?" Melissa asked, though her voice shook. James stared at the dust on the floor. There were no footprints. None at all. Over the next week, the attic filled itself. A box of books they'd tossed out on Tuesday was back Wednesday morning. The cracked wardrobe reappeared Thursday. The armchair leaned against the far wall Friday. James asked the neighbors about the house's history. An older man shook his head. "Some places just keep things," he said vaguely, refusing to say more. Another neighbor muttered something about the Hawthorne family, but when James asked, The man shut his door without answering. The following Saturday, James cleared the attic again. He locked the door behind him. But that night, Melissa woke to whispers. Faint. Children laughing. A woman humming. Sometimes crying. Always coming from above the ceiling. James bought a camera Sunday afternoon. He set it up facing the attic door before they went to bed. At 3:12 a.m., the door creaked open on its own. The camera caught something pale moving inside the frame. Before the feed went black, Melissa refused to go upstairs anymore. But James became obsessed. Every morning, the attic was full again. Every morning, the furniture stood exactly where it had been before they ever touched it. One night, James stayed up with the attic door unlocked. At 2:41 a.m. it began. Slow, dragging footsteps across the floor above him. He climbed the stairs, heart hammering, flashlight shaking. The attic was full. All of it back again, and in the dust by the rocking horse. Small footprints, dozens of them, like children circling something in the middle of the floor. On the final night, the banging started. Loud, furious, shaking the walls, rattling the windows. Melissa screamed for James to leave it alone, but he climbed the stairs shouting into the dark. The attic was full again. But this time the furniture was arranged in a perfect circle. The rocking horse at one point, the wardrobe at another. Chairs, trunks, boxes, all forming a ring around the center. Dust stirred violently inside the circle, swirling upward like a storm. And in the middle something moved, just enough for James to see pale fingers curling over the floorboards. Melissa heard the attic door slam from outside on the porch. She never saw James again. When the police arrived the next day, the attic was empty, but the furniture was back in its original places, like it had never been touched. Waiting. Marcus and Julia had never lived outside the city before. The constant noise, honking cars, upstairs neighbors fighting, sirens at 2 a.m., had worn them down over the years. When Julia found the listing for a colonial-style house on the edge of a small town, it felt like a sign. 2 stories, big yard, a porch wrapped halfway around. Too cheap, Marcus said when he saw the price. Old houses don't sell fast, the realtor explained as she walked them through dusty hallways on the tour. People want modern these days. Julia ran her hand along the carved banister. This is perfect. Even Marcus admitted the house felt solid underfoot. Warm sunlight slanting through tall windows onto wood floors scarred by generations of footsteps. It didn't feel empty. If anything, it felt like it had been waiting for someone. The first few weeks were typical new home chaos. Endless trips to the hardware store. Late-night pizza with unpacked boxes stacked like cardboard towers. Julia planted flowers out front. Marcus fixed the squeaky screen door. They joked about the drafty upstairs hallway, the way floorboards groaned under their weight. Old houses settle, Marcus said. But Julia didn't like the closet under the stairs. She didn't say why at first. The first time it spoke her name, she thought she'd imagined it. She was carrying laundry upstairs when a faint voice drifted from the hallway closet door. Soft, calm. Julia. She froze on the step, heart hammering. The closet was shut. The light above it flickered faintly like it was about to go out. She stood there for nearly a full minute before shaking her head, laughing nervously and hurrying to the bedroom. Stress, she told herself, just stress. 2 nights later, Marcus heard it too. He was brushing his teeth when something behind the bathroom wall spoke his name. Marcus. He turned, toothbrush in hand, expecting to see Julia at the door. The bathroom was empty. The voices didn't stop. At first, they only said names. Julia, Marcus, sometimes together, sometimes one after the other in that same low, polite tone. Then they began muttering words too soft to understand, like a conversation happening behind thick walls. One evening, Marcus tore apart the hallway closet. convinced there had to be a vent or old speaker hidden somewhere. He found nothing. No wires, no pipes. Just wood, dust, and the faint smell of something metallic, like blood left out too long. The voices started saying sentences the following week. "Marcus, we're waiting." "Julia, come downstairs." Always calm, always polite. As though whoever or whatever spoke wasn't in a hurry. Julia told Marcus about the night she heard dozens of voices at once. She'd been walking past the closet after midnight when a chorus of whispers rose from behind the door, all speaking together so softly she couldn't make out the words. She swore she heard her mother's voice among them. Her mother had been dead for 6 years. Marcus nailed the closet door shut the next morning. That night, the voices came from the bedroom walls instead. They called a contractor. He listened, nodded, then spent hours tapping walls, shining a flashlight into crawl spaces, muttering measurements under his breath. Finally, he shook his head. "Old houses make noise," he said carefully, "but walls don't talk." When Marcus tried to pay, the man refused. "Some things you leave alone," he said before leaving without another word. The voices grew bolder after that. Sometimes Julia heard them humming softly, the same few notes over and over. Sometimes Marcus swore he heard children giggling inside the walls late at night. One evening, Julia left her phone recording by the hallway closet while they went out for groceries. When they played it back later, the voices were clear this time. Dozens of them, overlapping like wind through dead trees, all speaking the same two names in unison. "Marcus, Julia, Marcus, Julia." That night, the voices didn't stay in the walls. They came from the vents, the floorboards, the ceiling above their bed. Over and over, polite, calm, almost eager. "Marcus, Julia." At 3:17 a.m., the bedroom door slammed shut on its own. The walls shook violently, and for the first time, the voices laughed. Not like people laughing. Too wet, too low. Like something imitating laughter after hearing it once badly. The next evening, Marcus heard his own voice echo back from inside the walls, calling Julia's name while she stood right next to him. They slept in the car that night. When the neighbors came by days later, the house was silent, empty, but people still crossed the street to avoid walking too close to it. Because sometimes on still nights when the wind dies down, they say you can hear voices drifting from inside the dark windows. Soft, calm, calling names. Not always Marcus and Julia anymore. Sometimes other names. Ethan Cole wasn't looking for excitement. At 32, he was burned out from city life. Long commutes, noisy neighbors, a messy breakup that had left him bitter and exhausted. What he wanted was quiet. A place where he could work from home, drink his coffee in peace, and maybe, for once, sleep through the night. When he found the listing for the small 2-bedroom house on the edge of town, it seemed too good to be true. The price was low. The location was quiet. One narrow road winding through acres of woods before reaching the property line. The photos online showed sunlit rooms, scuffed hardwood floors, a porch swing overlooking a weedy yard. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough. The realtor barely spoke as she handed him the keys. "Been empty for a while," she said when Ethan asked about the place's history. "How long is a while?" She hesitated. 10 years, maybe more. You'll be the first tenant since before." "Before what?" But she just smiled thinly and told him to call if he needed anything. The first week passed quietly. Ethan settled in, dragging his old couch into the living room, setting up his desk in the spare bedroom, fixing small things here and there. The house smelled faintly of dust and old wood. It creaked at night the way old houses do. The only thing that really bothered him was the feeling that some corners seemed darker than they should be. Not unlit, just heavy somehow, as though the shadows themselves were thicker. On the 7th night, Ethan woke around 2:30 a.m. Something had stirred him out of sleep, though he didn't know what. He lay still, listening. The house was silent. No wind, no crickets, just the hum of the refrigerator downstairs. Then, from somewhere behind the walls came the faintest sound. Breathing. Long, slow breaths. Not his own. Not close, but steady. As though someone was pressed against the other side of the plaster, inches from his bed, separated only by layers of wood and dust. He didn't sleep the rest of the night. The next morning he laughed it off. Probably pipes. Maybe a raccoon in the crawl space. But 2 nights later, sitting on the couch with the TV muted during commercials, he heard it again. A faint dragging sound inside the wall behind him. Slow, deliberate, like fingertips trailing along wood. He froze, listening. Dust. He turned the TV off. Silence. Then faintly, scratching. The next day, Ethan checked the crawl space. Cobwebs. Dust. No signs of animals. Nothing. But that night, as he passed the hallway, he swore he heard someone chuckle softly behind the wall. By the 3rd week, the noises were constant. Soft knocks in the kitchen walls while he ate dinner. Whispers low enough that he couldn't quite hear the words when he tried to sleep. Sometimes he thought he heard humming, tuneless and faint, like someone pacing in a tiny room no one else could see. One night, lying in bed, Ethan finally heard it clearly. A voice. Low. Close. From inside the wall near the headboard. Hey, just one word. Calm. Almost friendly. Ethan froze, breath caught in his throat. Who's there? He whispered. Silence. The next morning, he called the landlord. Said he thought someone was living in the walls. The man on the phone was quiet for so long, Ethan thought the call had dropped. Finally, the landlord said, "That house has been empty 10 years. You're the first tenant since the incident." What incident? Ethan asked. But the man hung up. That evening, determined to prove he wasn't losing his mind, Ethan moved his bed away from the wall and sat in a chair facing it. Midnight passed. 1 a.m. At 1:43, faint scratching began. Then slow, deliberate knocking. 3 knocks. Pause. 3 more. Who's there? Ethan whispered again, heart hammering. The knocking stopped. Then softly the same voice spoke. Roommate. Ethan barely slept. The next day, he borrowed a stud finder from a neighbor and ran it along the walls. Most were solid. But behind the bedroom wall, the reading stayed hollow for nearly 6 feet. Like there was space back there. He knocked. Something knocked back. Grabbing a hammer, Ethan tore through the plaster, dust choking the air as chunks fell to the floor. Behind the wall was a narrow passage, barely wide enough for a man to crawl through. It smelled of damp wood, mold, and something sour underneath it all. Old blankets lay crumpled on the floor. Cans of food long since emptied. And in the dust, clear footprints, fresh, leading deeper into the dark. Ethan called the police. They searched the entire house, even the attic. Found nothing. No person. No signs anyone had been there in years. That night, Ethan nailed the hole shut with heavy boards. At 3:12 a.m., he woke to hammering. From the other side, slow, steady, 1 nail at a time, matching his own. The next day, desperate, Ethan set up a camera facing the wall. At 2:57 a.m., the boards began coming off one by one. Something pale gripped the edges, pulled. The last frame before the footage went black showed a face peering through the gap, smiling. When the neighbors came days later, the house was empty. But they swore they heard hammering inside the walls at night. And sometimes, a soft voice saying, "Roommate, if you made it this far, thank you for spending your night with us." If these stories gave you chills, there's plenty more waiting. Don't forget to subscribe to Night Fear Stories for new terrifying tales every single night. Sleep well, if you can.